There it is. Thank you so much all for coming today. This talk is on beating the brain fog, 5 high-level action steps to a healthy brain. And who doesn't want a healthy brain? This is definitely something that we're all, wanting to be healthy in our lives and too many electronics. Okay, sorry. Let me see. Gary, is that better? Let me know if that's better first. If there's too many electronics, I could move my computer, I suppose, too. Are we good there, or you want to let me know and just we can keep going? Maybe I'll move my computer then. All right, we'll do it. We'll do a little change of pace here. We'll do a change of pace here. Is this better? So I will share my screen. And and there's a lot of slides in here, so I'm gonna focus on kind of the key points here, which definitely just let me know. Um, Feel free to interrupt or, discuss, maybe shout out in the Q&A because I'll look at the screen and it will let me know. But, looking at the 5 causes, not necessarily 5 causes, but 5 root causes of brain fog, what are the actionable strategies based on functional neurology, and what are some tools that you can actually use practically to take away tonight in terms of mental clarity. So definitely let me know. I've been doing webinar meetings, I mean, for a long time, not necessarily um, webinars. So sorry if this one's a little bit foggy here, trying to get the technology. So, understanding what brain fog is, it's really a subjective experience. It can't necessarily be measured traditionally. People have mental fatigue, they have forgetfulness, they have unclear thinking. Maybe they know how to get somewhere for a long time, but then, all of a sudden they don't know the direction somewhere. They know someone's name, but they start forgetting things. So, it's not necessarily what's called mild cognitive impairment, which is a more objective, potentially pre-dementia or cognitive impairment with dementia, where someone has basically the loss of certain executive functions in a more profound way. I think we could call this a subjective cognitive impairment or SCI. And really, this is a continuum of brain dysfunction. So it's not like they're necessarily separate, but everyone gets some brain fog from time to time, but it's when it becomes dysfunctional, when it starts affecting your work or your life or your relationships or your enjoyment of life, that's really when we want to really figure out. So I think I'm going to start with actually some of the high level kind of things in terms of how you understand brain fog. And so I would say the first thing that I would say, and that's kind of an overarching thing, is that we want to reduce neuroinflammation. We want to reduce brain inflammation. And I'm going to jump through this because there's just a lot of slides in here. Um, so, brain inflammation could be caused by a lot of things. Certainly sitting too much. So if you want to get up and do some jumping jacks, feel free, or you want to, get up off your chair, feel free to do that. But, reducing neuroinflammation improves, um, will be in part helped by circulating more oxygen and detoxing your brain from various uh, various substances, which we'll talk about in a minute. I'm going to actually skip a little bit here. So basically, I wanted to say about this slide, brain inflammation is kind of like a wildfire. So if you have one neuron that gets on fire or inflamed, so to speak, it will send inflammatory signals to another neuron. So likewise, if you have a neuron or glial cells, which are the supporting cells around the neurons that get calmed down, that will calm down the neurons and it'll also calm down the surrounding neurons. So the reason that I mentioned this neural network slide is I want to say that it's actually, not, I won't say it's hard, I don't say it's easy, but it's definitely something where as you start to gain positive momentum with reducing brain inflammation, it will have a positive, virtuous cycle essentially. So the reason why you'll kind of experience brain fog potentially with neuroinflammation is because neuroinflammation affects neurotransmitter production and neurotransmitter balance. And there's certain neurotransmitters that I have in the back of this presentation. But just to say, basically, we have one of the big ones that is really critical for thinking and intelligence, which is called glutamate. But glutamate
Mm,
can be overactivated, and glutamate can be kind of causing more excitatory part of, the system in the brain, which essentially means that there's more inflammation when there's too much glutamate. You might have heard of monosodium glutamate, which is MSG, right?
mm,
That's kind of one of those things that upregulates glutamate. A lot of chronic infections, Lyme disease, chronic brain degeneration, things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is associated with an increase in glutamate. So on the flip side, you have things like GABA, which we know is GABA aminobutyric acid, which essentially is a calming neurotransmitter. And both GABA and glutamate kind of interplay together, and you want to have this nice balance between GABA and glutamate, let's say. So a lot of times, another thing just to mention about glutamate is you can actually have anxiety and chronic psychological stress, chronic physical stress that causes anxiety that then causes more glutamate reactivity. So anything that causes more brain inflammation often will lead to a glutamate excess that leads to glial cell destruction, neuroinflammation, and that affects further neurotransmitter production. It also affects something called the mitochondria, which are the batteries inside your cells. And we know that mitochondria are really, really important, really crucial to combat brain inflammation. So, how are we going to reduce neuroinflammation or how are we going to reduce brain inflammation? Definitely we want to start with the diet. We want to start with really, really important polyphenols, if I can have it in here. These slides are kind of, I'm going to go to that. We want to start with actually polyphenols, things like berries, things that are red skins of apples, things like that. Green tea, cocoa, things like that, pomegranate. Omega-3 fatty acids are really, really important. I will say that it's important to have a good omega 6 to 3 balance. There's a ratio that can be tested on blood work, but omega 3 to 6 balance, if different people say different things, but probably like a 4-to-1 ratio would be reasonable here. And most people are at probably like a 20-to-1, let's say. So most people are walking around with a inflamed brain just from that imbalanced omega 6 to 3 ratio. We want to heal the gut to reduce brain inflammation because there's a gut brain disconnection. There's a gut brain um, dysfunction, I should say, that happens. Even gut inflammation often is the direct cause of brain inflammation. You actually see that with Alzheimer's disease. There's actually a higher degree of lipopolysaccharides generated from gram-negative bacteria that then leads to higher brain inflammation because the gut inflammation actually directly leads to this brain inflammation through a variety of mechanisms, but lipopolysaccharide, which also is a big cause of heart disease as well, as it gets into the arteries and inflames cholesterol. So think about some brain inflammation. The first thing I really want to say about brain inflammation in terms of the gut-brain connection is really it's also about balancing your circulation too. So, you have to make sure that you're exercising, you're doing high intensity interval training or at least walking, You're making sure you're sleeping okay and you're screening for sleep apnea, going to bed like earlier than midnight ideally or earlier than 10 p.m. probably. Um, so you do want to look at gut healing as well, looking at the gut microbiome, feeding the gut with good beneficial things, short chain fatty acids, basically things that have fibers, fruits, vegetables, things like that to heal the gut, maybe bone broth if you are, having some gut permeability issues, which basically could result in quote unquote irritable bowel syndrome, symptoms, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, undigested food in your stool, things like that. So brain inflammation, really, I wanted to say in this talk about brain inflammation, because we always get caught up with an organ. And I know you said you think we're going to talk about brain today, but one way to beat the brain fog is to beat the gut fog. It's basically to heal the gut. It's basically to improve your circulation. It's to improve your diet. All these things are going to help your brain because the brain's not really separate from the rest of your body. There is something called the blood-brain barrier, and it's kind of a misnomer because it's not really a barrier. It's more like a cheesecloth. So you want to really have enough nutrients that are going to be penetrating the brain, reducing brain inflammation, getting enough sleep, getting the exercise, things like that, getting the omega-3 um, percentage, i.e. omega-6 to 3 ratio. There's certain supplements that could be helpful. I have this later on, but I'm kind of in a kind of a talking mood right now. So I'll give you the recording of this, make sure I get that. I think the key supplements would be for a lot of people anyway, liposomal curcumin, which is a basically active ingredient of turmeric, which you probably know is what makes curry yellow or orangish, very highly anti-inflammatory, reducing brain inflammation, helping with exodus of both chronic self-infections from the brain, even things like Lyme, but also it helps to decrease chronic inflammation through NF-kappa beta, and it also helps to steer some of the beta amyloid away, kind of escort it away, so to speak, from the brain. So I think that would be a good place to go. This also is really helpful. I mean, some of the basic things which haven't gone over yet is really eating less sugar. There's so much about, how to reduce inflammation with supplements and, different things, cold plunges, which are great, and, hot cold, hit workouts and everything. But, we just eat too much sugar too. So sugar is actually one of the things that can cause neuroinflammation. And, most people probably, we shouldn't really eat sugar every day, even though it's easy to do. And then ideally, we would actually eat less than 15 grams of sugar per day, basically. So, which is still some sugar, but it's not as much as, most people. So I think that would be one easy one. Alcohol, this was a big study that came out a couple years ago, pretty recently now. I know when I was school, 2 drinks a day was fine. That was considered fine. Now it is less than 2 drinks a week, and the most recent studies have said that zero is the best, of course. So those people who are teetotalers, congratulations, you're already on your way to a healthy brain. However, and I think not drinking alcohol, I typically don't drink alcohol except on social occasions, but you do want to think about alcohol as a sugar. So if you're going to be drinking that night or something like that, not eating a high sugar diet the day of is helpful here. And then of course eating proteins, fats, things like that to kind of balance out blood sugar. Processed foods, I think, is probably one of the things that's the most important on here, and I think this has gotten a lot more press recently. Ultra processed foods that have lots of chemicals that are pulverized, they're highly, refined grains, or they just have a lot of additives to it. So a lot of processed foods will lead to cognitive decline, will lead to brain fog. So think about Whole Foods, not the company, but whole unprocessed foods, which could be at Whole Foods or other grocery stores. But it could be at your farmer's market. It could be if you have a farm or something, or know someone. So I think definitely getting back to nature, getting back to the foods that come from the earth that, don't have a lot of ingredients in them necessarily. We can't, don't have ingredients you can't pronounce. I think that's really, really important for basically reducing brain inflammation because what you eat is how your brain's going to be. And then some of the anti-inflammatory foods. One of the big things that we know that is now not true from the 1970s and 1980s is that, all fats are bad. Obviously, we know that now there's a lot of good fats, and fats are a really important part of a healthy diet, and especially the brain, because the brain is 60% fat. So you really, really need healthy fats. And in fact, a lot of times brain fog is a nutrient deficiency. So it could be a toxin excess like sugar, alcohol, pesticides, mycotoxins, which are mold toxins, chronic infections that kind of store up in the brain that cause inflammation, processed chemicals, pesticides, things like that, but could also be a deficiency of fats. Just not enough fat in the brain is going to by itself cause a brain fog. So eating some fatty fish, if you can eat fish, wild salmon, sardines. There is you might have heard this before, but a mnemonic called SMASH, which is basically salmon, mackerel, anchovies, um, sardines, and herring. Trout would also be, I think, fatty as long as it's not farm trout. And then walnuts are good, pine nuts are good, flax seeds are good, stuff like that. So omega-3s are found in basically fish and nuts, and you can also get this from algae oil from a supplement or fish oil from a supplement, krill oil from a supplement. I know people think krill oil is better. It might be a little bit better for some people. I don't know if there's any clear data on that. Omega-3 fish oil has more trials behind it, but phytonutrients we already talked about, and getting the kind of the rainbow in there. Organic foods ideally would be good. And then resveratrol is a nice supplement that does help reduce neuroinflammation, and you can actually check genetic tests now, which can tell you about how, things like resveratrol, curcumin, quercetin, which is a kind of an anti-mast cell or antihistamine supplement, is really, really helpful too. So that's kind of on nutrition and neuroinflammation. The other thing that I don't even think I have on these slides, and that's why I'm glad you're watching this here, is it's also the role of EMF, electromagnetic frequencies. And so this often I think is an under the radar thing too, like ultra processed foods, basically something that would cause more glutamate activity in the brain. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on, decreasing screen time, decreasing time away from your cell phone. I think when you read the fine print, you're supposed to be about, 12 inches away from your screen or your phone, which how many people like talk to their phone like this? It's kind of hard to do, but that's what the studies actually recommend. Ideally sleeping not with your phone, having your phone at least 3 feet away from your pillow, and ideally like in another room would be also helpful. So a lot of these things are kind of under the radar, but also really, really helpful. And I will mention mold again, just because that's really, really important. Mold is as a neurotoxin. It's generates autoimmune conditions, or I should say triggers autoimmune conditions. Chronic Lyme or Lyme disease or Bartonella, which is a Lyme co-infection, can also cause neuroinflammation. There's other things. I think we know in kids, autistic kids, or let's see, yeah, neurodivergent kids would have, neuroinflammation and excess glutamate, and there's different potential reasons for that, including glyphosate and um, antifolate binding antibodies and all this stuff. So there's a bunch of, other causes of neuroinflammation that you can look at. So number one would be to reduce neuroinflammation. Number two, I think, would be to activate the vagus nerve. So I thought about like how do you actually activate the vagus nerve? The vagus nerve is a big nerve that originates in your central nervous system, but goes through your heart, your digestive tract, all the way down to your diaphragm to breathing apparatus, but kind of goes throughout your body, and it's called the wandering nerve, and I think vagus is wandering in German, but the vagus nerve is very, very important for the tone of the nervous system, meaning the power of the nervous system, the balance of the nervous system. And the nervous system will help you influence in a really, really important way your gut, your immune system, your bone health, your musculoskeletal health, hormone health, your mood, quality of life, how your mental health. So the reason I'm mentioning all that is because when you activate the vagus nerve, one of the key things is sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, your vagus nerve will be shot and you won't have enough vagal nerve activity. And the vagus nerve is basically the rest and relaxation nerve. if you don't have the vagal nerve activity, then the sympathetic nervous system, which is the stress response, the fight or flight response, we also call that sympathetic overactivity or sympathetic nervous system dominance. It's like the accelerator. If you're driving your car, the accelerator is always on, not the brake, and you always have to brake it a bit so that the car slows down. Just like you want your body to kind of slow down and relax, you want your brain to also slow down and relax, and that's where activating the vagus nerve comes in. The vagus nerve does really help to activate the detox system. Basically, if you have vagal nerve activity, you're going to detox um, the sweat glands better, meaning the toxins will flow out of the sweat glands better. The cerebrospinal fluid will start to detox the beta amyloid and tau proteins and all the stuff that basically you need to detox to prevent Alzheimer's. So vagus nerve is really helpful for all that. And sleep is really very important, especially deep sleep. So deep sleep usually in the first half of the night. So having the vagus nerve activity is important for brain health, but also it helps to connect the gut and the brain. So there's that direct connection between the gut and the brain, which is in the vagus nerve. There are ways to improve your vagus nerve activity, to improve your rest and relaxation activity. One is going to be kind of just practicing deep breathing, chanting, humming, things like that. Cold plunging or cold exposure, even just like a little bit of a shower, that would help a lot. You can actually do things that bring you joy, that are relaxing with nature, with your pets, things like that. You can definitely increase vagal nerve tone basically through exercising and improving your cardiovascular fitness. That would help your vagal tone as well. And the thing I wanted to bring up in the slide, and that's kind of why I wanted to bring this up, is actually screening for sleep apnea is very important. Not just sleep apnea, but also upper airway resistance syndrome and basically a narrow airway. I want to give a shout out to some of our dental friends out there, the holistic dentists that are out there that are treating and diagnosing small airway syndrome, which essentially is going to make it really hard for you to get a high heart rate variability and a high vagal nerve tone. So you definitely want to treat and or screen and treat for sleep apnea. So obviously we have, there's you can go to a sleep doctor and go to a home sleep I mean in-lab sleep test. You can also do a home sleep test, and there are different, good ways to basically diagnose and treat sleep apnea, from CPAP machines to dental devices to myofunctional release therapies and all of these other things. So I think it's really, really important to treat sleep and to make sure you're sleeping well, and that's going to activate the vagus nerve. How much sleep depends on each person, some people are saying now you only need 5.5 to 6 hours. I think I'd probably do better with 7 or more, but ideally about 5 deep sleep cycles, which if you do the math would be around let's see, I'm gonna do the math right now, but that's at least 6 hours. No, it's like 7.5 hours, is that right? Yeah, I think it's 7.5 hours, ideally. So 6.5 to 7 hours. So reduce neuroinflammation, activate the vagus nerve. Blood sugar we talked about some. I think that's also very important. Which we can talk about more. I think movement's a big one. I think we don't move enough, basically, and I wanted to mention movement because really movement to activate nitric oxide, open up the arteries, kind of open up the detox pathways. And movement is one thing that will not only reduce inflammation, it will also activate the vagus nerve. It'll also stabilize the blood sugar, especially when you do quad exercises like squats, calf raises, even ankle raises are going to help post meal, post-prandial, post-meal. You can check a continuous glucose monitor. I know some of you already do that, but that can help you with reducing the risk of cognitive decline. Movement does optimize the mitochondria. Mitochondrial health is associated with brain health. The more mitochondria and the more function you have in the mitochondria, the better your brain power will be. So there's different things you can do, but movement's at the top of the list there. Sleeping well, eating foods healthy and fats, proteins, healthy carbs. Mito diet, basically low glycemic load. High polyphenols, high omega-3 fatty acids. When you look at all the things that basically talking about diet for brain health or nutrition for brain health, you can also look at it like what's a diet for mitochondrial health, what's going to support the mitochondria. So basically, when you look at the mitochondria just from that lens, that alone could be a whole nother talk. But essentially, you would think about healthy fats, things like, avocado, olive oil, fish, things like that that have omega-3s. You also think about the polyphenols. And then you think about in terms of micronutrients, B vitamins, definitely some of the antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin E. You think about the omega-3s. And then I would also say CoQ10 would be important, NAD would be important. NAD is pretty hot right now, so nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. You can test that via intracellular NAD test by Genfinity, but you can also just take NAD, which is what I do. So I would take some precursor of NAD basically, and you can do that either what's called NR or NMN, but essentially you can do that in the morning or before 12 o'clock, and that will help you. Just a little tip, what I've learned anyway, at least personally, is that when you look at how to boost the mitochondria, how to help with brain fog, you want to actually go higher than what the dose is on the bottle of the supplement. So talk to your practitioner about that. That's not really official medical advice. That's just my personal thoughts about it. They usually say about 50 milligrams, which is pretty conservative on the bottle. I would likely, for me anyway, I like to go up to 250 at times. So I find it to be very helpful. And I might have mentioned this on a social media post, but if you end up doing NAD, you would typically, if it's liposomal NAD, you'd want to drink your coffee before or after the NAD so it doesn't disrupt the liposomes, maybe by about 30 minutes. And then in terms of what types of movement here for mitochondrial health, I think muscle is king and queen and royalty there. A higher muscle mass will lower your blood sugar, it'll increase your insulin sensitivity, decrease inflammation. It'll basically activate the vagus nerve to the exercise with the increase in heart rate variability. It'll optimize your mitochondria because you just have better muscle function in general. It'll improve your circulation and nitric oxide, which helps open up your arteries. So you basically want to move for cardiovascular fitness, ideally 5 times a week. It doesn't have to be like running a marathon or something, but basically moving your body enough so you're sweating, so you're slightly out of breath, moderate to vigorous activity, but also you want to do some, I would say, muscle mass training. We're doing some weights, body weights, resistance training, free weights if you can, and stuff like that will be very helpful. If you can't do that, or if you have a bad back or different things, just sit in a chair and put your butt up. I did this the other day with a patient, so kind of just engaging your quads, raising your gastroc, so basically raising your calf muscles. And I'm kind of doing this, you can kind of see in my chair right now. So really, really nice to do just something like this. I'm doing a little squat in my chair right now as I'm talking here. So how many hours did we spend sitting? Quite a lot. I'm sure there's data on this. Maybe someone here has the information on that. Certainly sitting too much in a chair is associated with dementia too. So get up and beat the brain fog and optimize your mitochondria in the meantime. We can talk about vitamins in a minute if you want. The other thing is I think the mitochondria do need oxygen, which we just talked about, sleep apnea, ruling out sleep apnea, ruling out nighttime hypoxia. But it's not just about the oxygen level in the bloodstream. That when we are in the clinic and we're checking the finger pulse ox, 98% on someone, that's helpful just to make sure they're not like crashing right away and they don't need to go to the hospital, things like that. But it doesn't really tell you what the level of the oxygen is inside your tissues. That's really where it counts. Hard to measure that, but we can say that we can increase our tissue oxygenation through a couple things. And we can do deep breathing with diaphragmatic breathing. We can go into a higher pressure environment with oxygen, either through a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. We can actually increase something called 2,3-DPG with IV ozone. I know some of you have tried IV ozone, it's really helpful. Deep breathing is the first place to start, for sure with that. Um, and then I think as you keep on doing the deep breathing, you realize that you can start to expand your lung capacity, etc. by doing that. Of course, as you exercise more, you do more HIIT therapy and things like that, your mitochondria become more efficient at extracting the oxygen for use. Um, And then that'll help increase the ATP a lot more. Just gonna move over here. And then the other thing I think you could say is, go to a personal trainer, go to someone that's really exercise specialist that can really train your mitochondria to get optimized through some real, personal training. And then the other thing I'll mention that I've started to do a lot more recently, which I've been doing before, but just to try to activate some of the sirtuin genes is, which is longevity genes, is intermittent fasting. That does help the mitochondria too, and it helps your brain as long as your brain does, as long as you don't get hypoglycemic, so as long as you don't like hit the low blood sugar button, and you might know that if you get dizzy or brain fog, ironically too. So brain fog would be also caused by high or low blood sugar. So far we have reduced inflammation, we have activated the vagus nerve, we have optimized the mitochondria. The fourth thing would be to stabilize the blood sugar. I'm going to find, okay, we'll go back to that. I need to have time for questions. There's a lot on here. Um, I'm trying to find the sugar section, unless I passed it already. Basically, I want to say about sugar is too much is, blood sugar. Too much is not good for your brain and cause brain fog, and too little is too much for your brain. So definitely have to do that. Here we go. And we kind of talked about this before, but it's important to get enough protein, fiber, vegetables, things like that, fats before you eat the carbohydrates. I think that's the main thing. I wanted to say protein-rich breakfast, avoiding processed sugars. Try at least a 12-hour overnight fast if you can. You can go to 14, 16, 18, or even higher. That's going to increase what's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is basically fertilizer for your brain cells, and it'll help keep your brain healthy and active, and it'll help those brain cells actually grow more new neurons. You can also do calorie restriction. That's not appropriate for everyone, but just some other things to help to boost your mitochondrial function, help improve your brain fog. Um, and then the fifth thing is actually more fun, so I'm gonna just try to find it on here, is basically having fun by training your brain with neuroplasticity to stimulate your brain and your mind with cognitive exercises, with play, with integrating your mind and body, just basically having fun, learning new things, boosting your endorphins. Play a musical instrument, even if you're a beginner at it, that's fine. Learn a new skill. A lot of neurologists like to say, if you're right-handed, let's say use your left hand to open doors and pour your water and stuff. And if you're left-handed, do the opposite. So you're kind of doing different things. Don't take the same path every time, when you're hiking or something. Don't park in the same place. Um, learn something new. I think the mental and physical training is really, really nice. Things like ballroom dance, yoga, things where you're doing things that are quote unquote both mental and physical. Circuit workouts where you're actually saying positive reinforcing mantras to yourself is really nice.
Mm.
So that's really a nice thing to do because I don't know if we said this before, but basically when you say something positive to yourself while you're working out, your brain retains that a lot more. So that's a really nice thing to do in the morning. So you're setting your intention, but you're integrating it with your workout. You can do brain games, I think, brain IQ, luminosity, I think. There's trainers that do balance work if you're balance challenged, and there's different things you can do. There's functional movement studios, and you can just try new things out. I think hiking is great, as long as you can do it safely. You can do things where you're probably the main thing is just to keep training your brain. But the other thing I wanted to say, which I didn't kind of came to me here now, is the neuroplasticity is not just about skills and new things to try and learn, but it's also about meeting new people, or meeting the people that you've known about that you know for a long time in a new way, kind of seeing them in a new way, new light. So having the ability to really have and build community, and interact with people and keep your brain active that way is also part of training the brain to be quote unquote neuroplastic, meaning at any age, your brain, and into the 90s and beyond, actually, you can actually make new brain cells. And that's a relatively new concept to this that wasn't known, a while back. So th this is definitely something that's, nice that at any age your brain can grow and your brain can transform and your brain is neuroplastic and it can change, it can adapt, it can evolve. So really, really nice to kind of look at your brain as just an amazing friend for you to a friend, not fog, maybe. That's good. And so, if you do have brain fog, it's not that the brain fog will last with you forever necessarily. It's a message from your body that, some things need to be optimized, some things that are dysfunctional need to be functional and balanced. And I will add one thing which I needed to say is that when you talk about optimizing your brain, you do have to think about the role of hormones. Hormones would help with reducing brain inflammation, stabilizing blood sugar, optimizing mitochondria. Specifically, estrogen would be one of the ones. I think estrogen would be, and then progesterone for sure with the GABA. So just some things. DHEA is an adrenal hormone, but also very helpful for brain health, anti-aging hormone and things like that. So there's a lot of things, other things you can do that we didn't necessarily talk about today, but I would say those are the main things. Again, top five, reduce brain inflammation, activate your vagus nerve. You want to stabilize blood sugar. You want to optimize your mitochondria, and then you want to train your brain with new skills and meet people or see your people in a different light and build that community, and that's going to help those brain connections even between other people too. So I hope this was helpful. I can stop the share here and we'll chat more. Let me